Welcome back to the Dershow. Not a lot of news today beyond the terrible storm that's about to hit in the west coast of Florida. We have a place in Florida. We spend a lot of time down there, but we're on the East Coast. But still, we get sometimes some pretty terrible weather mixed with some really great weather. And anybody who doesn't believe in any kind of climate change, you just have to look and see. Obviously, the waters are getting warmer, the ice caps are melting, and human beings clearly have something to do with it. And can we stop it? Can we change it? I leave that to the scientists. But the we'll talk about the storm in a minute. The only news item I noticed today is that finally, President Biden spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Of course, he had Kamala Harris on the line too, because she's running for president, and he wants to make her as presidential as possible. I'm not aware of any other situation where a president has gotten on the phone with the prime minister and included as vice president. She's not being included as vice president. She's being included as obviously candidate for president. She was asked in her softball interview on CNN, well, what did you discuss, and what did Bibi say, and did he give you any hint about what's going to happen in Iran? And she said it was a classified call. Of course, it was a classified call, and that she couldn't comment about it except to say it was important. It's a classified call, but we'll learn about it. Obviously, it will come either from American sources or Israeli sources, but we'll learn about it. Will we learn the whole truth? I don't know. Maybe we'll eventually learn it from Woodward if he writes another book in which he discloses confidential material about conversations between President Biden and other heads of state. So we'll wait and see. Okay, the storm. I'm not a meteorologist. I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in climate control. I just see what I see. But it seems to me that everything is political these days. And both the left and the right, both Republicans and Democrats, are politicizing the storm and the response to it and the response to the previous storm. That happened, obviously, with previous hurricanes. I remember George W. Bush clearly was attacked for his failures. Brownie's doing a great job. Remember that. And so it's natural. But when you have a storm like this a month before an election, it's going to become politicized. And that the Democrats are going to put Kamala Harris front and center. If you saw the press statements that were made today, you have the President of the United States saying a couple of words and then really basically turning it over to the vice president, the candidate for president. And she complains about all the misstatements that are being made. Fact checking, there aren't that many that were being made, and apparently there were none, as far as I've heard, that endangered anybody by telling people not to leave or not to stay hunkered down in their house. Obviously, whenever there's a horrible and threatening event like this, you're going to get some predatory people taking advantage by raising prices and making some items unavailable except at very, very high costs. So that's natural, and that doesn't turn on party affiliation. That happens by all people on all sides of all issues. It's just a deficit of human nature that people are prepared to take advantage of crises. Who was the political figure who famously said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing both sides taking full advantage of this storm to show up their candidates and to claim that if you're the incumbent administration, you're doing a great job. If you're the candidate who wants to become the president, you say they've done a terrible job, though you did a great job. Is there nothing that's beyond politics? Is there nothing that we can just say, look, we're a country. Um, the storm doesn't distinguish between Republicans and Democrats. It affects everybody who's in its path, and it ought to be responded to in the most nonpartisan, non-political way. But that's probably asking too much on the eve of an election, and so we have the Democrats saying that it's the Republicans who are issuing a false information. Again, I haven't seen the evidence. Maybe there's truth to it. Maybe there's not. Um, and we're not talking about debating climate control because there is a difference. Republicans, not all, not even most, but more of them than Democrats seem to question the viability of climate warming being a function of companies and corporations and human factors that pollute the environment and create opportunities for climate warming and climate control to take place. So there's obvious truth to that, but whether the causes of it fall along party lines, I kind of doubt that. And again, if people are misleading other people, are they doing it for political purposes? Or are they doing it because they believe it? Again, I've seen no evidence, and I saw on television one of my former students who wrote an op-ed piece on this, saying that Doug Schoen, saying that he's following it very closely, that he's seen no evidence that the Republicans or anybody speaking on behalf of Trump is endangering anybody's life by telling them not to evacuate or not to go and hunker down in a safe place, maybe in their basements, to avoid the impact of the storm. If that's the charge that's being made, it's, according to Doug Schoen and others, a fake charge. Doug and another friend of mine, Andy Stein, had a very good op-ed in the New York Post the other day. They're both, I think, Doug is still a Democrat or an independent. I think he's close to me politically in some ways. And Andy Stein is a former Democrat, former president of the city council, Democratic president of the city council of New York, who's now become a Trump supporter. And they had an op-ed piece in which they really took to task the Democratic administration, the Biden-Harris administration, for its failures in the previous weather disaster, and anticipating that maybe the same problems will occur here. Not clear the same problems will occur. It seems to me that the current administration is doing a better job on this hurricane that they did on the past hurricane, perhaps because of the criticism they got from people like Doug Schoen and Andy Stein and others. But in any event, it's just tells us something about where America is at when so many political points are being scored or attempted to be scored by partisans who see everything through the prism of politics. And you could just see it. I mean, when you watch these talking heads on television, I just don't believe so many of them. They talk in this kind of way that makes you understand they're not being credible. They just roll off the talking points of their party. They don't think. They don't want you to think. It's just partisan blather, and you don't know who to believe and what to believe, and then it gets multiplied on the internet, and more time is spent blaming the other side on failures growing out of these storms than on dealing with the storms themselves. I don't know what the answer is. Obviously, how to deal with storms should not be a partisan issue, but maybe you could have a nonpartisan group of experts who deal with these issues in a nonpartisan way. But everything is partisan, and the Constitution makes it that way because the Constitution appoints the president as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, which means inevitably the armed forces become political and can be used politically. Also, all the cabinet positions that deal with health and safety and natural disasters, they're all a function of the executive branch of the government, which is under the control of the Democrats now, and we don't know under whose control it will be in the weeks to come. But the Constitution allocates an enormous amount of authority to the government in power, which is interesting because George Washington, of course, was opposed to political parties. He didn't run under the label of a political party. He was obviously the chairman of the various events that led to the establishment of the United States. He played an important role in every aspect of the founding, from the Declaration of Independence to the military victory to the Constitution. Those are the good things. And then he played a role in some of the bad things. He signed the Alien, or he proposed and supported the Alien and Sedition Acts. They were signed by his successor and protege, John Adams, who also did some good things and some bad things. Defending the Boston Massacre people is something that, from my mind, was very good. Had I been alive at the time and been asked to do it, I would have defended the people at the Boston Massacre, though I strongly opposed them. On that show I did yesterday with Piers Morgan, which many of you responded to in letters and emails and posts. Obviously, my debating opponent took me to task for who I represented, and Piers Morgan clearly took my side of that and said, no, you don't attack a lawyer for who he defended. And of course, they selectively pick who I defended. They don't mention that I defended or helped to defend or was part of the legal team defending people ranging from Nelson Mandela to Bill Clinton to various Democrats and Republicans over time, people who many of you agree with and many of you disagree with, people like Anatoly Sharansky, a Soviet dissident. I've represented lots of women who have been subject to abuse by men. But, if you go after a lawyer, you don't go through their whole career. You just pick cases. Jeffrey Epstein, he's a monster because he represented Jeffrey Epstein. People said that about John Adams. People said that about Abraham Lincoln. People said that about Thurgood Marshall. People said that about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, these are all people who defended controversial plaintiffs and defendants in various litigations around the country. But back to the storm. So everything's political in America, and there's no surprise that among the things that are political is the storm. The storm hopefully will make landfall and move on quickly. The latest news I heard is it's being downgraded from a 4 to a 3, which is good news, and that it's speeding up, which is also good news. So it'll pass through the very highly populated towns more quickly, but there will be consequences. That hopefully there won't be deaths, but there may be, and injuries, and certainly lots and lots and lots of damage, property damage, and businesses closed, and a government has an obligation to deal in a completely nonpartisan way with these issues. The one thing that would be a disaster, and I think both parties have been guilty of this, is you look at the states that are a disaster and where there's the most problems, and you say to yourself, is that a state that's going to vote for me? If not, well, what the heck? If it's going to vote for me, well, sure, I'll help it. But you can't make decisions involving the health and welfare of American citizens based on these kinds of partisan considerations. The president of the United States is the president for all the people, not just the people who voted for him. And he's the president of all the states, not only the states that voted for him in the Electoral College. So let's hope that we can move past the partisan aspects of this. It's bad enough that the judiciary has become so partisan, that the Justice Department has become so partisan. By the way, in Woodward's new book, apparently he's quoted as saying that he regrets having appointed Merrick Garland as Attorney General. The implication, it's not clearly spelled out, the implication was that it was as a result of Garland being appointed that his son Hunter was prosecuted and now convicted, we know, and pleaded guilty. And that if he had appointed somebody else, maybe Hunter Biden wouldn't have been prosecuted. Every president complains about that. Bill Clinton complained about his attorney general, Janet Reno. Donald Trump not only complained, he fired him, and complained about those that didn't do his bidding. He fired the head of the FBI because he demanded that the head of the FBI be loyal to him. Of course, it depends what you mean. He's supposed to be loyal to the presidency and the incumbent president, not as an individual, but as an institution. But obviously, the attorney general is a very, very political and partisan position. I've often said, I've written about this extensively. Back 30 years, I've been writing about this, that the attorney general's position is an impossibly schizophrenic one, because on the one hand, he's supposed to do the political bidding of the president. He's supposed to help the president get reelected. He's a member of the president's cabinet. He's supposed to give him advice, helping him to be elected. And on the other hand, he's supposed to be the nonpartisan, objective person who decides who to prosecute without regard to politics. And we're the only Western democracy that really doesn't divide that function. Canada doesn't, but it does in practice. But England, Israel, so many of the other countries, they have different offices. They have the Minister of Justice, who's the political figure advising the president or the prime minister. Everybody knows that that's a partisan position, and you expect it to be. You expect your Minister of Justice to be loyal to you. And then there's the Director of Public Prosecution, or some countries call him something, or her something else. And their job is to objectively decide who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. We merge those roles. And so every president, with the exception of Obama, who was very satisfied with his attorney general because his attorney general did his bidding on virtually everything. The attorney general was essentially his alter ego. But almost all the other presidents have been dissatisfied with their attorney general, and I'd be curious to know who each of the candidates for president, if they win, would appoint as attorney general, because that's a really, really important position. Look, all the top cabinet posts are important. I remember when I was a kid, we had to memorize who the cabinet was, and we used initials. The cabinet was Saint Wappernockel or something like that. Let's see, Saint Wappernockel. Saint is state, that's number one. Treasury, Saint War. So Attorney General, that's WAPA. Postmaster General. I'm getting there, because the original cabinet, I think, was only about 8 or 9. And we know cabinets have played an important role. A team of rivals that Lincoln appointed famously, including people who are opposed to him and people who ran against him. We don't see much of that these days. We don't see teams of rivals. We see teams of loyalists. So not so good for the country. All right, let's turn to some letters. Lots of letters about Piers Morgan. You were very wise to let Mohammed Ajib talk. In my life of 62 years, I have never seen a worse advocate for any cause. Hopefully you put an end to his TV career. I said at the end, he not only did himself no good, but he also did the Palestinian cause no good. He hurt the Palestinian cause. I don't think he really was on there to promote any particular ideology. He is a showman, and not a particularly good one in my view. To Professor Dershowitz's credit, he did not lose his temper once. Professor's maturity is unparalleled. Well, I do occasionally lose my temper, and I occasionally do lose my cool. That's part of being a passionate person. But as soon as I saw him overdoing it, I said to myself, he's his own worst enemy. And as I said on the show, when he interrupted me over and over again, I said, keep talking. I'm really very happy when you talk. and Piers Morgan made it clear that he had hurt himself in his cause. Professor, I just watched your debate on Piers Morgan with Mohammed Ajib. I have so much respect for you and your work. Hope you really mean to sue that loser. I do. I've consulted with my lawyers. I've sent them the videos, and we've identified the defamation per se. We've identified where we're going to sue him, and we haven't yet put a figure on it, but it'll be for a lot of money, and we'll have a trial, and let's see how he can justify what he alleged against me. None of it's true, so I don't think he's going to be able to justify it. Professor, a lawyer for some of the people who say they were sexually abused at Sean Combs' parties are settling with celebrities who attended these parties out of court. If these celebrities are not criminally indicted, is it possible we will never know who they were? Well, that's a big issue that's going on now. Generally, when these things are settled, they're settled with non-disclosure agreements. Let me be very clear. I've never made a non-disclosure agreement. When my accuser withdrew her charges against me and said she might have misidentified me, there was no NDA. There was an agreement not to disparage each other. But non-disclosure agreements are now subject of congressional hearings. There were hearings in which Congress has thought about possibly outlawing them. I'm not sure they have the power to do it in the states, but these non-disclosure agreements. I have a friend who's a Hollywood lawyer, a former student, who's a Hollywood lawyer, and she represents lots of actors and producers and directors. And she, for a while after the movement that started exposing all these people became prominent. She said she was writing out six-figure checks every week on behalf of famous people. Somebody would walk into the office and say, "I represent so-and-so, he's famous, he had sex with me, pay me $100,000 or I'll disclose it." And the public relations people would say, pay the money. These people have unlimited amounts of money. And if they're accused, they're guilty in the eyes of public opinion. Look, in my case, I have proved beyond any doubt that I never knew the person. But nonetheless, obviously, as reflected by the show the other night, he can still accuse me of doing what I'm sure he knows I didn't do. So that's why these kinds of non-disclosure agreements are prevalent and common. And there are many, many people who have been accused and will never know it because they've paid money to hush money. The interesting thing about the case against Donald Trump, he's being prosecuted, he's convicted of not disclosing the payment of hush money. Why would anybody ever pay hush money if they had to disclose it? It's called hush money for a reason. I've never heard of a case where anybody was prosecuted for paying money for non-disclosure. Okay, there's a lot of comments, a lot of my letters, because the thesis of the show was that I thought Harris was winning and Trump was losing. And the question was, is Harris really winning or is Trump losing? A lot of people say, no, Trump's winning, Trump's losing, because people want him to win. The people who write to me and say that want him to win. And so what they do is they sometimes, in my mind, confuse what they want with what the polls are showing. But a lot of people wrote to me and saying, don't believe the polls are not accurate. And then here's one that says, Harris certainly isn't campaigning like somebody who's winning. Yes, she is. She's campaigning exactly like somebody who's winning. She's not answering any hard questions. She's not doing any press conferences. She is only accepting softball interviews from CNN and others who she knows want her to be president. This question is about this new book that I've just finished. Just literally sent it off to the publisher tonight. The book about the 10 big anti-Israel lies and how to refute them with truth. As I said, I want to get 1 million copies of this pamphlet to 1,000 colleges. And I've gotten a lot of nice support from people saying they'd like to help in the process of doing it. We're all doing it pro bono. Nobody's making any money. I didn't get paid for writing the book. My publisher's not getting paid for distributing the book. Book's going to be distributed free. But this is a letter that says, good luck on finding 1 million college students who are actually interested in the truth. Was another one who said, good luck in finding 1 million college students who have actually ever read a book. But we'll make it available, hopefully in different formats, and you can get to the truth in different ways. Okay, God bless you, Alan. We need these pamphlets in universities in Europe. Any chance you can get them here, please? Sure, I'm happy to. It'll be in English. I mean, obviously, if some company wants to translate it into French or Italian or German, I give them that right to do it without charge. And I will send copies to, say, the Oxford and Cambridge University Hillels or Chabad's or anybody else. My goal is anybody who is willing to read this pamphlet. It's around 100 pages, and you can skim through it because it has each of the arguments and each answers to the arguments. So you can focus on a particular argument that you've heard and get the answers to that, or you can read the whole thing, which is, of course, my preference. Back to Piers Morgan. Wow, I just watched Piers. Respect, Alan. Your patience is amazing. It wasn't my patience. It was a tactic. I realized the guy was really stepping on his own. And the more he talked, the better off my cause was, my support for Israel. He was the worst advocate for any cause I've ever seen. So the more he talked, the happier I was. So it wasn't a question of patience. It was a question of tactics. Wow, I went and watched the debate with Piers and Mohammed Ajib. I don't know how you held your composure so well, but bravo, Professor. You handled that brilliantly. It's always best to let them show the viewers who they really are. He was a man-child. Again, I about halfway through, I realized that he was just going to babble on. It didn't pay for me to try to intrude. On a couple of occasions, I did intrude and corrected the record, and Pierce let me say things, but he was constantly interrupting. I just saw him do another debate with Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, and he did the same thing. He just wouldn't let Shmuley talk, and he wouldn't let Pierce talk. He just babbled on. Anytime somebody said anything, he just interrupted, and then he complains when people interrupt him. You were very wise to let Mohammed Ajib talk, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes on and on. It's always hard to know who to debate and who not to debate. I got a number of letters from people saying you should never have debated this guy. It just gives him publicity. But he was going to be on anyway. In fact, I'm told he was originally going to debate somebody else, and that's one of the spokesmen for the Israeli military. And that person backed out. I don't know if it's true. And then they asked me, but I think about who I should debate. But generally, if the person is going to be on anyway, I'd rather be able to answer him than let him go unanswered, or to have somebody who is less experienced or less knowledgeable on the subject. So, but I sometimes refuse debates. I've refused debates with a number of people who behaved like this guy did. I would not debate him again. Once is more than enough. I'm glad I did debate him. And a lot of my friends said I shouldn't have, But look, I have nothing to fear from debating him, because I know that if at least if the truth is allowed to be expressed, that objective people will not oppose Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas, against Hezbollah, against the Houthis, and against Iran. And I know that most Americans support that view, and I hope that whoever's in power in Washington supports that view as well. Have a good week and weekend, and see you all next week.